Yeah, that's outstanding. It reminds me of something that one of my old VPs, really great guy. His name is Troy Halford, and I worked with him in the early 2000s or the early to mid 2000s. He said, we're working with a particular customer, and he said, Nate, he goes, you want to work this deal to the point that they feel bad if we lose. And I never forgot that because he's like, because we're all humans at the end of the day,
Mhm.
right? You want to interact with people and be a good person. And when he said that, I'm like, well, no, man, I want to win this deal. Yeah, whatever it takes, type thing. And he's like, yeah, but he goes, if they feel bad that they don't do a deal with you, that means you've done a good job, right? Just from a human level, because you're all investing time and money and effort and the opportunity cost of working on something else that could have potentially happened. And I thought about that because as we're talking about that deal that you had, they said, "Hey, we're going another direction." You're like, "You know what? We're going to go back and we're going to see him. We're going to give him one last shot." And then you end up winning it. That hotel chain I'd mentioned, they literally felt like crap because the procurement guy actually worked at another company that had a very large deal with, and the guy just liked how I rolled, and he liked the service that we were providing and such for his old company. He literally felt like shit when he told me that they weren't going with us, and I did what the normal salesperson probably doesn't do. I said, hey, I completely understand. And if something changes, let me know. I took the high road, right? But I'm inside, I'm like,
Mhm.
oh man, I was going to make a ton of money on this deal. But fast forward, like a couple weeks later, he called me back. He's like, hey, do you guys provide XYZ? And it was a newer service we had that we ended up doing. And they're like, okay, let's get it done. And the kicker was the contract that they said no to, it was $1 million plus. That particular contract was literally execution ready. So think about how much time was spent with procurement and with the legal teams and the back and forth and all the bull crap you have in a contract where lawyers hash it out and such. So it feels good to get, even though it was a smaller deal, it felt like a win, inside for me because the customer literally felt bad. He's like, man, he goes, I'm so sorry. I know the service is great, and I personally, the procurement guy said this. He goes, I personally absolutely wanted to do this because I can't stand XYZ vendor that we're staying with. But it was just an interesting thing that you said about, to me, it popped into my head, making them feel bad that they don't do that deal with you.
Yeah, and I think this conversation is helpful because it's something that we used to have a lot. I grew up through these companies seeing some of the best men and women salespeople I've ever seen, and how they worked dynamically with the executives and how they worked with the support teams, and they made the whole company feel like that they were in sales. And it's something now, with video conferencing and everything else, you don't get as much of that time to you're really selling internally. When you're a salesperson, you're not just selling to the prospect, you're selling internally to the company on why we want to work with this prospect. So you've got to get both sides excited on why they want to work with each other and how to do it best. And so it's a bit like being an ambassador sometimes between two different countries. But these conversations are really important because it was eye-opening for me as I've gone through my career to hear some of these sales stories on how they overcame certain things or what they went through, or if they ended up working with that executive again at another company for a different contract because they built up such great rapport. So I think that it's a good thing that we continue to do, and somehow we figure out with new technology and new ways to be able to pass this along. Because to me, it's also very important to understand that sales isn't offered as a curriculum anywhere in a college. But as we talked about, when the CEO comes down, they talk to the CFO to find when a new CEO comes into a company. I want to talk to the CFO and find out where we are financially, and I want to talk to the head of sales and know where we are in our forecast.
This is great stuff. I love it.
Mark, one thing you had mentioned just now, working with different salespeople, and you've been at a couple companies where sales was, in my opinion, sales was king. Oracle and SAP, right? Everyone's rowing in the same direction. Publicly traded companies. It's all about the number, et cetera, and they're both very successful companies. What would you say of all the people that you've worked with over the years? Some of the top, I don't know if I would say personality traits or what have you, but what were the things they did that stood out to you? Like, hey, I really liked how Sally did this. I really liked how John did that. Anything that kind of jumps to the forefront of your mind with respect to some of those, I like to call them rock stars, so to speak, the sales execs that really just always did a great job. Clients loved them. They're very demanding internally, but obviously successful, et cetera.
I would say that the people overall, the skill that I saw was a force multiplier, meaning that a lot of times we didn't have a marketing budget, but we had to figure out how to do something on the marketing side. And they scraped together, they worked with other teams. The organization you mentioned, they really weren't sales led and aren't sales led. They're IT led. So you had to get the IT department excited about what was going on. In both cases, Hasso Platt and Larry Ellison, those two companies, both of them were strong IT people, very strong IT people. And that's the way that they look. But they're also very competitive people. So if they can know that they can get in there and compete and do something, they will. So I'd say the trait that I saw was executives that could cross over an organization to get things done. They weren't, they weren't standing up and say, hey, we're sales, we made our quarter, we made our year, get out of my way. They brought people along and they said, marketing, we've got a big number that's coming up this year. What can we do? Where are we spending money that we can save? And here's some areas that we might be able to go. How would we work together on that? Certainly in development. This is a tough one, right? But seeing executives that can work with development to understand development has a long time frame, lead time to come up with a product set. And sometimes they work in a vacuum. And they think because they worked with one company or one prospect that this is the way the product has to go for the next 3 or 4 years. And when you get them involved in sales and you get them involved seeing a couple different clients and prospects, then they realize, oh, well, I guess we can take it a little differently. And we have a bigger opportunity rather than just one big client. We have several clients if we take it this way. So crossing over. And then finance is a big one, right? Because finance puts together the numbers, and a lot of those numbers are predicated upon where we're going to finish in sales. So finance and sales are natural enemies. I mean, we talk totally different languages, but the best leaders work with finance very well because finance is dependent. They spend a lot of time building models on what the company can spend based upon what we're able to see in revenue and sell. And so the more insight that you can give them into what you're doing and how you're doing it, the better that their models work. And so that relationship becomes a much better relationship rather than looking at my expense account and determining whether or not I was able to have 2 glasses of wine with dinner, and all this craziness that goes on between the expense reports and sales. And it's also interesting. I mean, you get that conversation going to really help your team so everybody understands, hey, these guys are on the road on Sunday night. Don't bust them for being able to get a decent hotel room and this kind of stuff.
Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is that, that from the internal standpoint, managing those conversations, helping people see things from your point of view and vice versa, definitely key. If you're recruiting a salesperson, what are some of the intangibles that you look for?
We used to talk about this a lot at ADP, and I like the acronym, or the thing. You have aptitude and you have attitude. And I will take attitude every day of the week. And it's got to be, you've got to have the right mindset to go after stuff, the right mindset to learn. You've got to be coachable. It's a hard thing to do sometimes. The reason that we see a lot of athletes or ex-athletes go into sales is because they are coachable. They've seen themselves on film. They've gone through this. And that's a big part of what you need to do in sales is be able to pitch your product, be able to do it. My poor wife has learned more about technologies because I've had to go through my pitches with her, right? Back in the day when I sold office equipment, my mom learned more about copiers and fax machines than she ever wanted to, right? You've got to practice and you've got to go through those cycles and repetitions. So you have to have the attitude that can do that, and then you can stand up to that. And then if you have the aptitude to actually learn and learn something new, because you rarely bring over a salesperson into the same industry or the same product set that you're selling. So they have to be able to learn that thing, but they've got to have the right attitude around it.
Interesting, like it.
I give you a great example. I used to bust on a couple of people on my team. They'd show up and we're a technology company and they've got a pen and paper and they're writing all this stuff down. And I'd say, you've got an iPad in front of you. You got to show up as a technology player. You can't show up at the old school for this stuff.
We worked together. We worked together for a couple of years in the past job, And I remember we're going into a meeting with a customer, and there was a certain piece of service that we did not do. And we're going through, and I'm doing my shucking and jiving and doing my thing. And my technical guy was talking, and then the customer asked a question. They're like, "Hey, do you do X, Y, Z?" And I was about to say, we do not currently." And you said, "Yes, we do." And I'm like, "Shit, you were pretty new to the company." And I'm like, "Man, what's going on?" So we went through the pitch and everything. Like, okay, let's engage, blah, blah, blah. We ended up selling the customer, by the way. But I called you right after. I'm like, "Dude," I said, "we don't do that." You're like, "I know, but we're going to. And by the time these guys sign, it's going to be something we do." And I'm like, "Whoa, thank you." Because I had no idea, right?
Well, and it was interesting because I think getting back to your original point, what do you like to see in an executive is air cover. We didn't do that particular service at that time. However, I knew enough about the product set coming from that company to say that we should be doing it. There's no technical reason why we can't do it. It's just because somebody hasn't put the budget in or hasn't done it yet. So when I take the information that, hey, we've got a sales cycle here, it's worth this amount of money, here's the time frame that we're running on, can we get approval to put the budget in so that Craig can run this product? And the president says, well, yeah, if you got a deal on the line, go ahead and do it. Okay, it's done. The prospect and the client doesn't need to know all the internal gymnastics that we have to go through, but that's kind of that air cover that you've got to fly for your team whenever possible.
Yeah, that gets back to the thing we've talked about before, Rob, which is I'd rather beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just throw stuff out there and then the customer's like, "Yeah, okay, let's go." And then you're like, "Oh shit, now we have to actually do it." Can we do it type thing. So it's a little bit, sometimes a gut feel. But yeah, building things around customer requests, back to your point earlier, Mark, when you're going in, especially that Lockheed deal, there's hundreds of people involved. You can't go in with a rigid mindset. And I can say this because I'm German. I am very rigid and very stubborn, 100%. But you can't go into that opportunity thinking this is how we do it. You're either going to do it like this or not. And in a massive opportunity like that, you've got to adapt and adjust to the situation and build things for that particular customer, because not only is that a huge opportunity for that particular company, but they have competitors, right? You can then take that solution, go to the other company that they compete with every day and say, "Hey, they're using X, Y, Z." And then you're selling on fear, which is super powerful because their competition is using a solution that makes them more efficient. So there's some upside down the road as well in that scenario.
Well, and it's also a situation when you're selling. Clients like that do want to see standardization. If it's not an area that is going to make them money, or it's not an area that's going to do it, in the manufacturing process, car companies get together all the time and they want to see standardization from their vendors so they know that their innovation can go on from there. If everything's unique, it's problematic for them. All their vendors, Michelin works with a lot of different companies, not just BMW. So if they can have standardization across all those, all the costs come down. And so when we're dealing with the aircraft stuff, hey, Airbus wanted to know what's going on with Boeing, and they all want to know what's going on with Lockheed Martin. And that's okay as long as it's not in an area that's intellectual property. If it's in a manufacturing process that they all benefit from, they're willing to share those processes.
That's interesting because from the outside looking in, you wouldn't think that'd be the case.
We call it cooperation.
Yeah.
So you compete in certain areas, but you cooperate in other areas. So you have cooperation.
For sure. So Mark, one thing, and you talked about some of these items already with what you just covered. If you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you're, 23-year-old buck, just coming out of school, right? Starting your career in sales. If you could tell yourself, hey, it's going to be a long road. You're going to have a successful career. Here's some things to keep in mind. Things you wish you knew then that you know now. What would you tell yourself? And selfishly, some of what I do is I'm guiding and coaching newer sales execs, right? Mm-hmm. So I always like to know, what would you tell the next generation of sales execs how to be successful, or anything that, big picture wise, that is going to help them be more successful?
I think one of the areas that was a huge focus for me coming in was role playing. And I don't see that as much now, but we used to do that a lot in between us as reps. Yeah. We would make sure that as we went through something, we role played it. We made sure that we saw the downfall, because if I'm doing a pitch or I'm doing something, I want to make sure it connects. And everybody thinks, oh, I'm going to get it right the first time when I walk out there. Well, you know what? Actors do a lot of practicing before they actually show up to do something. And they go through a lot of different, maturations of I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, I'm going to see what connects. We used to do that a lot. And I don't know how much that's actually done now, but the role playing helped me a lot with feedback directly before I would get into an opportunity and that kind of thing. I'd say the other thing is early on, I might have been a little timid with executives, that age difference between being 23, 24 and being with a 50-year-old, some gray on the temples or somebody that has a little bit of power. I might have tried selling a little low and stay within, that water level that I felt instead of reaching up. And I might tell my younger self to reach up a little bit more, sell up.
That's great.
Well, one thing I would correct you on, Mark, is 50 is not old.
No, not when you get there.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying that. As I was combing my hair the other day, I looked, I'm like, dang, I'm getting some gray. And my wife's like, you're getting some gray in your hair. Thanks for reminding me, honey.
Yeah. I love what you said about role playing, and it's fresh in my mind because I literally just spent the last 2 days outside London leading a sales training where we did a lot of role playing. And one of the takeaways always is that we all have blind spots. And so you might be saying something, and I see this over and over and again, where people say something and it completely sabotages and even contradicts the point that they're trying to make. And they have no idea that they're doing it because they don't realize the power of their words. And it could be something, sometimes it's obvious. Like, yesterday I remember one of the guys said something like, yeah, we're pretty sure this is probably going to work. Or probably does not belong in that sentence. It's like saying, well, it's your money, let's give it a shot. It's not going to end well. But it's such a powerful thing because, to your point, if you don't say it and you don't practice it, then it's completely up to chance what comes out of your mouth when you start talking.
We had a sales conference with a prospect in the room in Australia, and we had people from all around Asia. And it's very interesting because they're coaching me before this on don't point. Don't be an American, you can't point. You can open your hand, but you can't point. It's very rude. And I've got like 100 things they're coaching me on as an American. Don't do this, don't do that. I'm like, is there anything I can do? And you look out in the audience and there's blocks of where people are sitting. So Japanese are sitting here, Chinese are sitting here. They don't intermingle. They're completely separate. First time I've had interpreters. So I'm looking in the back behind all these rows and there's people sitting in these booths with headphones. And then I realized that in the audience, there's people with headphones and it's being interpreted. And so they'd gone through a point and they'd say, you go through your presentation, don't do any Americanisms. And I don't know, we got talking about one of the competitors and I said, yeah, they're big hat, no cattle. And I saw people doing this. I looked back at the interpreters. The interpreters were all looking at each other. And I went, oh yeah, I stepped on it here. This is really going to be good. So I had to explain about empty promises and, talking things up. And it was a mess. But yeah,
it's
you
interesting.
got to role play these things and really go through the whole thing.
Yeah, even things that you don't think are American. I used the word gouge in the session yesterday because we were talking about a situation, and you'll appreciate this, where they had gone in and they'd pitched something, and the client or prospect came back and said, you were literally twice as high as the nearest competitor. And then he turned around and he said, here's where I need you to be more efficient in your process. And I love that because he's basically giving them here's how to do business with us. And it really reinforced. And the point that I was making is this is not about price. It's about value. Their peace of mind for them is they don't want to feel like they're being gouged. And people looked at me like, what does gouge mean? I'm like, they don't want to feel like they're being taken advantage of from a price perspective. But it was like a simple word that I had no idea that nobody there, the Brits didn't know it. The folks from Finland and Denmark didn't appear to know it. And everybody was like clarifying, going, what is that word?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing when you work international because you really do expand your knowledge set of how people think around the world and how they think differently. Our salespeople in Germany came up through the product set. They learned the product before they were able to go out and to sell it because they were expected to be the technical resource. And when they saw the training that I had, it didn't go over very well.
Would they say big cat, no cattle?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So all I did was say, well, it depends.
Well played. I love it.
But yeah, so it's very different in how things are sold around the world and even within a region. The relationships that they look on in Latin America, for example, They don't do a technical deep dive in a lot of things. They build on relationships, and they want to understand, how often will you be down in Latin America to see how this is progressing and how this is working, and so on and so forth. And time is a completely different construct down there too. It on time does not exist that way.
Well, really interesting you would say that, because the thing that struck me the last 2 days, time was a different construct, but in a really good way. Everybody was in the room 2 minutes before the break ended, in their seats, ready to go. I have literally never seen that before. Usually people are straggling in and on their phone. But the one thing I want to come back to that you brought up earlier, because I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but I really wanted to acknowledge you for this, because you talked about how important it is, for people within the organization to lead into, you were talking about scraping things together and getting things done internally, which I love. The word I would put to it is being resourceful. And then you turn around and then you share that story of doing exactly that when you went to the CEO and said, we've got this opportunity here. Do I have your commitment that we can move forward on this and make this offering, do this product or service, and got that in advance? That's resourceful. And it's a key thing, because I firmly believe that isn't something you can teach people. They're either resourceful or they're not. You can't send them to Resourcefulness University to teach them how to do it.
But you have to build trust within the organization. And most of them don't grant you any, especially if you're coming from sales. And so that's an issue that you have to try to do. And you're going to have to fall on your sword on a couple of things. But once you build that trust, you can get things done. And as long as you're reasonable with them, one of the things that we'd always talk about is in finance, they would go, oh, well, that's going to take X amount of dollars in this amount of time. Seriously? And so I'd say, come on, I won't do this to you if you don't do this to me. And they go, okay. And we go back and forth, right? And so once you can work together and the executives at the top see that you're willing to work together at that level, right? The president doesn't have to get involved. I don't have to get him. Sometimes I did have to make my pitch because I couldn't work, but they knew that I tried. And so, when it came to it, we decided not to do this. But Mark did come to us and give us the business case and show us what was going on. And then I may get what I want. I may not get what I want. But they saw that the level of effort, I wasn't trying to hide anything, and I wasn't trying to go above their head until I felt like I had to.
Yeah, beautiful.
You had mentioned a little bit earlier, price was twice as expensive as the competition. And one of my old work buds from the mid 90s, I'll never forget what he told me about that, because he said, a customer told me it's expensive. And I said, well, what'd you say? He goes, I basically said, it is expensive. And he said nothing else. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. And he said, well, from there, the conversation went to, well, here's why it's more expensive. Our solution does blah, blah, blah. So it was interesting. Basically, you're not refuting what they're saying. You're acknowledging it and saying, here's why it's expensive, right? Yeah. And one thing that I've learned over the years, in many ways the hard way, is sometimes it's a buy once, cry once, right? When you purchase something, you're spending more money up front on a higher quality item, whatever it is, but you don't have to replace it at some point down the road, right? And you buy once, cry once type of a scenario.
No, you get visual cues from the people that you're selling to. You can tell if they're wearing things that are very expensive or high quality. You can tell. You're in London. You can tell if somebody's wearing a high quality suit or high quality shoes. It's built on that Savile Row, but you can tell right away. You can tell depending upon the jewelry or handbag or briefcase or whatever it might be. You can tell what they're carrying around for a laptop, that kind of stuff. Do they buy quality stuff, or is it cheap last year's model type of stuff that they're doing? Sometimes people will have car keys hanging around. You can tell, if they've got a Mercedes or if they've got a Kia or whatever, right? And it gives you visual clues to understand that I can leverage into these things and they will buy quality.
Yeah, exactly. The thing, Nate, I want to come back to something that you said, which is really important, that whole idea of it is expensive, or, even at neutral acknowledgement, price is certainly an important consideration. Any of those is better than the knee-jerk reaction that most people have, which is, Oh, well, and I hate cliches, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, just give us a chance to sharpen our pencils and we'll come back. I was talking about this with a group yesterday. I said, think about that for a second, because I love to talk about the difference between what one person says and what somebody else actually hears. And I said, if you lower your price, that's the first thing you do when somebody pushes back. I said, what did you accidentally communicate? And they're like, it's basically like saying, you're right, we knew it was too high. We put it out there hoping that you wouldn't notice. That's basically what you're saying when you lower the price right away. And it is like, that's a great way to blow your credibility and trust.
Well, and it's certain companies train their prospects and their clients on buying. Oracle and SAP, we trained them on the end of our year. They were going to get the best deal. And we enforced that. We tried to stop it several times, but it was ingrained in everything that we did. Amazon, you look for the big deal day on when it's coming through for that sale. That's one of the things that you also have to be careful of as a company is, are you training your groups? Because that communication goes around between buyers so easily now. They know that, hey, ask them for a discount. Do this, do that. Now, the other thing that's also was ingrained in me is you never give unless you get.
Yes.
So
100%.
If I'm going to give a discount, I'm going to get something. And it may be as simple as I'm going to get a referral. I'm going to get you on a video for half an hour at whatever trade show, or I'm going to get whatever, or I'm going to have you talk to 3 prospects this next year, right, as an executive. And it's amazing, though, when they realize, okay, I'll give up a little bit. It means less marketing for me, and I'll give that to you.
Yep. Yeah, that's such a key thing. So many people don't get that. And then it's like, okay, well, it's a concession, and without getting that trade back, all you're doing is training the people to ask for more, which is a horrible precedent.
Yeah, and listen, I'll put it in the contract too. I'll put it in the contract that the level that I expect, the CFO, CHRO, whoever it is, 3 times they have to be able to do this for me for a year.
Yeah, one thing I heard years ago, and I don't know who said this or where I picked it up, but the term was never apologize for your price.
Yeah.
Because as you just said, Rob, let's sharpen our pencils. Anyone listening, don't ever say that. Because it's kind of I don't want to say it's stupid, but for lack of a better term, it's stupid to say, because you're immediately devaluing what you have. And at least for me personally, from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, it physically pained me to ever give a discount. It really did. I mean, I went in with that mindset of, this deal needs to happen so payroll can be made. We can continue to deliver good service to our customers. And so it physically pained me to ever give a discount. And my opinion, you have to have that mindset going in, because if you do, you're already at a higher level, right? If you go in kind of back to your comment earlier about, not having a lot of confidence when you were younger or coming up, hey, I'm going to talk to lower level guys because I don't have the right to talk to a 50-year-old old guy, which is young. But you learn that as you go, but I never forgot that term, never apologize for your price.
Well, and I think the other thing too is that these conversations are important because you have to get creative. Now, listen, I'll give you a discount, but I need a 24-month contract, not a 12-month contract.
Exactly.
Or a 36. And you can do that all day long now, with what we're doing with the pricings that we're putting for SaaS and those types of things. People forget about that. Like, oh, well, our contract says 12 months. Okay, we'll just change it to 24. Yeah. Same contract, but I will give you a discount for signing up for a longer term.
Absolutely. So, Mark, I know we're almost at time here. Anything else you'd like to highlight or cover or discuss that we haven't covered yet this morning?
I think probably one of the most difficult things is talking about all these things in the singular, the I. Everywhere I worked with an amazing team. And I think that's probably what you think back on as you go through, and you realize that building that team, it sounds cliche, right? Sharpening your pencil, building a team, but working with people that you respect and working with people that every time you step into a meeting, you're not the smartest person. You're going to learn something from somebody else if you shut up and listen. That is kind of key, right? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Go find another room. It's time to move up. If you're not, learn. I learned so many things from so many men and women that have come along, and not just in sales, right? I learned some great stuff from executives that came through marketing, that came through finance. Just, do that. Learn as much as you can and build that trust within the organization that you're just not trying to sell a product. You're trying to get two companies to work together and have a relationship. It's amazing the help that you'll get from the rest of the organization.
All right, I got to ask one more question. What's the last thing you learned that you wish you had known a lot earlier in your?
I think that for me, the last thing I learned was to be careful. What I talked about technically, that I knew more than I did. And so I'll give you a great example. I had an IT person. We were working with a financial services company. They were allowing us to do a SaaS product, but it had to be located in the United States. It had to be with only people that had background checks that could pass all these things. Think about what happened with Microsoft and the military for their support recently and how badly that went. It was a completely opposite of that. And so I said, listen, we've got some stuff going on with this company, and we need a little bit of a technical service to make sure that somebody can see this product, but they can't allocate it from anywhere. They can't do anything. And they said, okay, well, it's in a room, and we use a Bastion hosting thing, where you have a server, you have access, but it's only on this Bastion portal, blah, blah, blah. So I went into the meeting and I'm like, I got this. Bastion, right? It's written on my hand, Bastion. I go through the whole thing. We got the deal, but the CI was really nice. He pulled me aside and he goes, you realize that Bastion hosting is like East technology that we used and, did this and did that. I didn't go back and kick the shit out of that son of a bitch that did that to me, but I did make it known that that is not the way that we were ever going to work again. And then it was crazy, but learn more about what you're saying. And it's so easy today, but don't just think that you got a few keywords and just start spitting them out there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for making time. I know you're super busy, and it's been a great discussion, and I thank you so much for making time to speak with Rob and I today, and look forward to talking to you again here soon.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning in to Sales Stories with Nate Teske and Rob Sullivan. We had fun today. Mark, what a great guest you are. If you enjoyed the content today, our simple request is hit that like button, subscribe, share it with other people in sales or just people in any profession who interact with customers and would want to know more about some of these tips around communication and being resourceful, all the great things that Mark shared. So thank you very much for tuning in. Stay tuned. There is a lot more to come.